Let's go with the Ruthless Aggression era. 20 minutes.
WWE's Ruthless Aggression era was truly one of the greatest times in wrestling history. And a lot of what made this period so interesting was its fantastic storylines throughout. But what were the very best angles of the era? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at right now. And where better to start than with the feud that in many ways got it truly started off, Kurt Angle versus Brock Lesnar. Yes, if Steve Austin versus The Rock was the in-ring feud that, more than any other, represented the Attitude Era, then WWE were in a bit of trouble come the time of WrestleMania 19. As while both men would clash at this show, it would be the last time they ever did so, as it would not only be the retirement bout of the Rattlesnake, but it would also be one of the last showings of the People's Champion as a full-time wrestler. Luckily then, a program worthy of replacing this was booked for the main event spot on that very same night, with that program pitting Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle against future UFC heavyweight champion Brock Lesnar. That's right, rather than being built around the two most over characters in the company, this one was built around the two shoot best athletes, similar to how the new generation had been built around Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels in many ways years before. And while the match which took place that night was incredible enough that even Brock Lesnar almost killing himself doing a botched shooting star press towards the close of the bout wouldn't ruin things, this would only be a taster of what was to come. Yes, over the year which followed, the two would meet multiple further times in tag encounters and twice more in singles matches, with the last bout between the pair, an Iron Man match on the September 16, 2003 episode of SmackDown, still being among the best matches WWE has ever given away on free TV to this day. Sure, after that the feud would die down, but by this point it had done its job in helping set the tone for what the Ruthless Aggression era would be and how it would differ from the Attitude Era that came before it. And now that the tone had been set then, it meant other great stars could flourish, with the most notable of these probably being John Cena, as this was around the time he transformed into the Doctor of Thuganomics. Now it might be easy to sit there today and think John Cena was always
Thuganomics era John Cena with the raps. Y'all will never remember. My boy put out a whole album and did a music video in the hood. y'all can't remember that one.
He's going to be a superstar, but that wasn't always the case. No, despite getting a big push right out of the gate when he debuted on the June 27, 2002 episode of SmackDown to challenge Kurt Angle, things quickly began to fall apart for the West Newbury native after that, as, with a character which could politely be described as Create a Wrestler preset number 7 from SmackDown Here Comes the Pain, there was just nothing to get behind with him. So thank God he finally figured out something then, and just in time, because it was while his head was already on the chopping block and his name was being bandied around as one who would soon be released, that he appeared on the Halloween-themed episode of SmackDown on October 31st of that year, dressed as Vanilla Ice.
Hey, I know everything about Thuganomics.
With the spirit of Vanilla Ice here, Cena used this appearance as an opportunity to drop some bars, with this proving to be so entertaining that it quickly became his character going forward. Yes, this was the birth of the Doctor of Thuganomics, a cocky heel white boy rapper who it didn't take long for fans to get behind. That boy shot a music video in the hood.
Y'all don't remember that.
And with such an entertaining gimmick now firmly established,
y'all don't remember that
it was off to the races for Big Match John, as over the months which followed, he'd rise up the card, win the United States title, survive a stabbing from Jesus, and put out an excellent Best of 5 series with Booker T. Sure, by the time we got to 2005, the fact that Cena was clearly now being pegged as the next face of the company meant the rough edges would have to be sanded off his character, with him at this point mostly dropping the white boy rapper aspect of things, and instead transforming into the Super Cena figure we know him as today. But even if the Doctor of Thuganomics was no
Thanks
more
for the
than,
follow,
it
my
would
guy.
continue to be remembered
I don't know why it's
for how
not
it revived
popping
his
up,
career
but
from the brink
appreciate
of
it.
death. Fondly enough that it would even make a one-night cameo return at WrestleMania 35 in 2019. But let's move away from what was happening on SmackDown back during the early to mid-2000s for a moment, as there was more than one brand at WWE at the time.
The spinner.
And those brand lines were only further separated by the introduction of the draft in 2002. So this meant our next great storyline played out on Raw.
Evolution.
And Raw alone. What are we talking about here? Why, the saga of Evolution, of course.
The demons.
That's right. If the early days of Ruthless Aggression era SmackDown were defined by things like the Angle-Lesnar feud and the rise of John Cena, then the early days of the same period over on Raw were very much defined by the rise of Evolution, a stable made up of Triple H, Ric Flair, Randy Orton, and Batista. Why was that? Well, as a spiritual successor of sorts to the Four Horsemen, this one had a lot to live up to.
This is where Batista got that fucking next boost, you know? This is where he stepped up from just the guy who's in the WWE who's doing the power bomb to the fucking superstar working with Rey Mysterio, okay? Y'all don't know about that. Now let me teach you, okay? So after Evolution, Batista went through like just a little period of wrestling, and then boom, him and Rey Mysterio paired together, tag team champions. Best duo ever to do it. Until he fucking turned heel and turned on Rey Mysterio. Worst moments of my life. I cried. I remember being that little boy sitting there watching the TV, and he turns Rey Mysterio around and power bombs his ass. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't fucking believe it.
And somehow it managed to do just that by the time all was said and done. After all, it succeeded in taking two rookies, namely the Viper and Big Dave, and turning them into megastars, two of the biggest names of the Ruthless Aggression era overall, in fact. And as if that wasn't enough, it also managed to completely reinvigorate the career of Ric Flair and give him a few more years on top, all while it was also firmly establishing the Game as the final boss of Monday nights. Sure, we did have to suffer through the infamous Reign of Terror here, but that can be forgiven when you consider Evolution also gave us Randy Orton becoming the youngest world champion in WWE history when he won the World Heavyweight title at SummerSlam in August of 2004 at the tender age of 25. And we can also forgive the Reign of Terror as it ultimately led to Batista breaking out from the pack and becoming champion himself when he beat Triple H for the title at WrestleMania 21.
Told you.
Seriously, the reality is that were it not for Evolution turning its two rookies into stars. Seriously, the reality is that were it not for Evolution turning its two rookies into stars, the landscape of WWE going forward would have been very different. And for that reason alone, it has to rank as one of the most successful stables of all time, and one of the most successful angles of the Ruthless Aggression era too, as the moment Big Dave finally decided he had enough of his leader's manipulation and gave him the thumbs down to signal he was coming for his title, still lives on to this day as one of the greatest moments in Raw history. Of course, there would be plenty of other great moments which came after that too, though, including our next subject, the love triangle between Edge, Lita, and Matt Hardy.
This one was tough.
What made this one so special? Well, like with so many of the best feuds, this one was very firmly rooted in reality. As it was in 2005 that it came to light Edge and Lita had been having a real-life affair behind the back of Matt Hardy. So obviously then, there were a lot of genuine bitter feelings here. Feelings which only got worse once Hardy was fired from WWE for going off about the situation publicly. Luckily for him, Hardy was fired then. There were a lot of having a real-life affair. As it was in 2005 that it came to light Edge and Lita had been having a real-life affair behind the back of Matt Hardy. So obviously then, there were a lot of genuine bitter feelings here. Feelings which only got worse once Hardy was fired from WWE for going off about the situation publicly. Luckily for him and his fans though, he'd be rehired soon after this, and at that point, the lines between fiction and reality got fully blurred as he'd immediately start targeting Edge, someone who is now in a relationship with Lita on screen as well. What followed on?
He was in heavy.
From there was something truly unique, as we all knew the real story here, and the real anger Matt had for both Edge and Lita. So whenever they met in the ring, it all felt real. Not that things ever got completely out of control though. No, everyone involved was professional enough to put personal feelings aside enough to protect each other in the ring. And because of that, we'd see the two men meet 3 times in singles matches over the course of 2005.
Yeah.
Once in a street fight, a second
time
inside
I remember
of a
that
steel
drop,
cage,
bruh.
and a third time
I'm pretty
in a
sure this one's why he's limping
fight,
still.
A second time inside of a steel cage, and a third time in a climactic ladder match. Who came out on top in the end? Well, despite being the heel hated by fans everywhere, Edge was seen as the bigger star, and so he'd ultimately reign victorious. And while this upset some at the time, in the end, it worked out great, as it was this which partially led to him truly reaching that main event level and becoming the rated R superstar we all know and love him as now. But let's move backwards in time for a second. Because
that Edge WWE Championship run was different.
Let's move backwards in time for a second.
You think you know me?
It's there we find our next great storyline of the Ruthless Aggression era. A story which happened a couple of years prior to the Edge, Lita, Matt Hardy love triangle, and in many ways served as the swan song for an Attitude Era legend's full-time run. That's right, it's time to talk
Hollywood
about Hollywood Rock. Now, we know this wasn't actually the end of The Rock's full-time run in WWE, as he kept going until 2004. But really, this was the last truly great character he created before he went off to Hollywood, as it was the one which saw him once more embrace his heel side and fully play up to the fact fans were starting to turn on him and his constant excursions away to go film movies. Really, you could make a solid argument that this version of the People's Champion, who came out to the ring with a slowed-down version of his theme song and a guitar in hand, ready to give the unwashed pores the treat of a lifetime by listening to him play a concert, was the best version of The Rock we ever got. After all, there's a reason Dwayne Johnson drew so much from it when he turned heel again in 2024. And it wasn't all just about Rock concerts here either. No, it was also about the feuds the Great One was involved in. Feuds such as his aforementioned WrestleMania 19 showdown with Steve Austin, his big-time beef with Bill Goldberg, and his rematch of the century with Hulk Hogan. Still not convinced Hollywood Rock was one of the best things about the early Ruthless Aggression era? Well, how about the fact it also gave us his TV program with the Hurricane?
Yo! Ah, fuck. What game was that, bro? Oh, I used to play this, bro. When I was a little kid, I used to play Hurricane all the time. I don't know what game it was. I don't know what, like, console. I just remember playing, bro. Him.
One of the
he
most
was the character I always
things the company did during that period, and a testament to just how giving Dwayne Johnson was to those lower down in the pecking order to him. Seriously, for as much as everyone loves his babyface run during 2000 or his big comeback in 2024, we honestly do think Hollywood Rock might have been the pinnacle of what we ever got from the People's Champion, and that's including his movie work too. Of course, come 2004, he'd be gone though, and this meant a void would be left in his absence, a void that was soon filled by another legendary feud, the feud pitting John Cena against Edge.
Oh my god, this was
Edge
elite
wasn't
level
limited to
television.
just one great program during the Ruthless Aggression era, as, aside from his time spent fighting with Matt Hardy, he'd also have an arguably even more iconic feud with Big Match John. Why do we say that? Well, because this one was in many ways the defining one of the entire era.
Wes
as it pitted
Newberry.
the easy number one babyface the company had against the number one heel. It all began at New Year's Revolution 2006. That was
Back
when the
when you
Rated R
couldn't watch
superstar
pay-per-views,
finally
oh
decided
God.
to cash in his Money in the Bank contract
It was
on a
hard as
pro
hell to
John
figure
Cena
out.
following his brutal Elimination Chamber main event bout. And like that then, Edge was able to beat the champ in short order and start off a rivalry which would continue on for years, with it always keeping Raw interesting whenever it flared back up again. Sometimes the heel would win, as happened at the aforementioned New Year's Revolution or at SummerSlam 2006, and sometimes the babyface would walk out of things the victor, as happened at the Royal Rumble that same year, and then again inside of a steel cage on Raw. But no matter who got the pinfall, things never seemed to be settled, as the pair would always find their way back to each other eventually. Hell, they'd continue fighting all the way up until the end of the 2000s, at which point the era of Ruthless Aggression was starting to give way to an all-new PG-infused time. And it's the sheer longevity of this one which makes it so memorable, and such a big part of what made the Ruthless Aggression era what it was. Sure, you could argue that Cena vs. Randy Orton was great too, but that one got pretty
elite.
stale for many fans after a certain point, the same of which can't really be said for Cena vs. Edge. Maybe it was the excellent chemistry the two had. Maybe it was the perfectly defined heel-face dynamics. Whatever the case, for one reason or another, this one just worked, and it kept fans invested for years. That said, it wasn't just this feud which was keeping fans invested in WWE during the post-Attitude Era, as, while this was happening over on Raw, over on SmackDown, we were getting treated to another great feud in the form of Eddie Guerrero versus Kurt Angle. That's right.
Y'all, oh my god. Bro, the Eddie Guerrero funeral was nuts. Like, it was just, you couldn't believe it. And like, at the time, I'm legit, I don't understand death, but bro, when they brought the low rider out and then everybody came behind it, bro, cinema.
Right, like with Edge,
R.I.P.
Kurt
though.
Angle has multiple entries in today's video. But then how could he not? Because for as great as his program with Brock Lesnar at the start of the era was, his program with Eddie Guerrero during the midst of it was arguably even better. Why is that? Well, it's Eddie Guerrero we're talking about here. One of the greatest to ever do it.
Yeah.
So when he got a chance to mix it up in the ring with another GOAT contender in the Olympic hero, then there was no chance it was ever going to be anything less than excellent. Need some examples of just how excellent their meetings were? Just look at the absolutely incredible match they had at WrestleMania 20 for the WWE title. A match which actually served as Eddie's first big defense, as it came only 1 month after he beat Brock Lesnar for the gold at No Way Out 2004. And if that's not enough, what about the rematch they had at SummerSlam that same year? Or the 2 out of 3 falls bout they had on SmackDown a month or so later? Really, this one deserves to be talked about a lot more than it is, as seeing both men desperately try to prove they were the best was easily one of the best stories of that time period. And it's one which proved you didn't need wacky angles in order to make something engaging, as it was almost entirely centered on what they did in the ring. That said, as with all great storylines, this one ran its course eventually, and so it was that after one final meeting on 2005 on an episode of SmackDown, the pair would part ways once and for all. Luckily though, not long after that happened, over on Raw, the company would be able to replace its greatness with a blast from the past in the form of a D-Generation X reunion.
Yeah.
Sure, you could argue that the real peak of DX came during the Attitude Era, but that doesn't mean it wasn't also great to see the original incarnation of the group.
Bro, the comeback of this shit was so elite, bro.
After all, enough time
they did not give a fuck.
That the whole thing felt nostalgic. And if there's one thing wrestling fans love, it's nostalgia. So when at WrestleMania 22, both Triple H and Shawn Michaels dropped crotch chops during their bouts against John Cena and Vince McMahon respectively, everyone was suddenly excited about the possibility of what was to come. And that excitement would prove to be warranted by the time the summer rolled around, as it was then that HBK came to his old friend's aid and helped him defend off an attack from the Spirit Squad, with the two at this point deciding to formally get the band back together.
If you're not a real one, bro, you had to buy the DX disc set.
How could it be?
That shit was fire.
These were both men in their 40s now, after all. So because of this, they wisely changed things up here, as instead of playing the bratty kids roles, they instead went for something closer to dad humor when they spent the next few months making life a living hell for both the Spirit Squad and the McMahons. What do their antics involve now for both the Spirit Squad
I remember
and
that
the
shit.
McMahons? What do their antics involve now? Well, dressing up as Vince and Shane on an episode of Raw in order to mock them, for one. That and tagging the McMahon's private jet with a garish puke green DX symbol.
Yeah.
And as if that wasn't enough,
blew his shit
was
up.
Also the time they set off fireworks inside the boss's limo, too. Yes, it was all very cartoonish, but this was the vibe Triple H and Shawn Michaels were going for here. And it worked out great for them because the kids in attendance always loved what they were seeing, and their parents no longer had to have any worries about letting them watch what this band of degenerates was doing. So much longevity did this revamp of DX have, in fact, it would continue going on and off, right up until Shawn retired in 2010. But then by that point, the Ruthless Aggression era had ended anyway, so it felt like the right time to tie a bow on things and move on. But let's flash back from there again, back to the early days of the post-Attitude Era, as it was on Raw in 2003 that we got our next great storyline of the era, the unmasking of Kane.
Oh.
Now, for those of you who weren't watching at this point in time, it's impossible to overestimate how big of a deal it was when on the June 23rd, 2003 episode of The Red Brand, the Big Red Machine was forced to reveal his face to the world for the first time. Why was he doing this? Well, the on-screen reason was because he'd lost a bout to Triple H, where the pre-match stipulation required him to demask should he get pinned. Needless to say then, this was something fans had been anticipating for years, as at no point while he'd been playing the character had Glenn Jacobs ever shown his face on TV. And considering he was supposed to be scarred as the result of a fire which almost killed him as a kid, interest as to how he would look was high. But with the potential for prosthetics or makeup sweating off mid-match, WWE decided to not go with the obvious here by having Kane be physically disfigured. No, after that first reveal saw him have what looked like some black dirt on his face, from there on in, he'd look relatively normal, with the story at this point changing to the idea that his scars were all psychological. Sure, this might have disappointed some fans. What didn't disappoint them, though, was the absolute tear the Big Red Machine went on after this, as now, feeling like a true monster again for the first time since 1998, he very quickly became the most fearsome creature on Monday nights once more. And that led to him doing some truly diabolical things over the weeks and months which followed, things like destroying his tag team partner Rob Van Dam, setting Jim Ross on fire, and electrocuting Shane McMahon's nether region. Yes, with him now not under a mask, he would take that craziness up to a whole new level. So good would this run end up being,
thank you for following, my gang.
Would still be in the midst of it when a few years later in 2005, our next great storyline of the Ruthless Aggression era played itself out, the revival of ECW.
Oh, hell.
And no, we're not talking about WWECW here, the third brand Vince McMahon had for a while between 2006 and 2010.
ECW was
What we are talking about instead is that initial revival which took place at June 12th, 2005's One Night Stand. What made this show so special? Well, for one night, and one night only, it truly felt like ECW had returned, as with Paul Heyman being given full creative control of the event and Vince McMahon keeping himself at a distance, the spirit of everything the Renegade Group had once been was allowed to run free once more. Yes, some people were skeptical during the lead-up as they doubted such a thing could ever be allowed to happen under the WWE banner. But those doubters were proven wrong in the end because after the Rise and Fall of ECW DVD turned out to be such a success, the boss was inclined to make this pay-per-view as legitimate as possible so that it would keep those fans happy. And that's how we ended up getting a show which included matches like Rey Mysterio vs. Psychosis, Sabu vs. Rhino, Mike Awesome vs. Masato Tanaka, and in the main event of the evening, the Dudley Boys versus Tommy Dreamer and the Sandman. And what a main event that one was, if for no other reason than because of the entrance for the Sandman. That's right, if you ever needed any proof that this show featured the real spirit of ECW and that it was one of the greatest story beats of the Ruthless Aggression era, then you only have to watch the scene of a packed-out Hammerstein ballroom singing along to Enter Sandman as the babyface hero walks in through the crowd, drinking beer and busting himself open with the empty cans afterwards. Really, it was a moment so magical there was no chance it was ever going to be replicated again during subsequent years. But then, all the moments and storylines we've talked about today were all magical in their own ways. And that's exactly why they represent the best that the Ruthless Aggression era had to offer.
That was a W.